everyone, and welcome to the Marcos podcast, where we talk about history and current events. I have a very fun topic for us to talk about today, and I'm excited to get into it. We have been on our World War II series, so I thought it would be interesting to talk about the propaganda in World War II, specifically art used to influence culture. But first, if you're new here, let me introduce myself. My name is Marcos Gonzalez, and I'm part of Professor Courtnage's Humanities 120 class and the host of the Marcos podcast. Now let's get into the podcast. So let's start by answering the question, what is propaganda? Propaganda is when you distribute disinformation or half-truths to influence public opinion. We all know the horrors and tragedies of World War II. So what were people thinking back then, and what influenced culture to bring the world to be at war? Well, in one way culture was influenced back then was through art. And I'm sure you may have seen some of these artworks before on TV or in history books, such as the Uncle Sam poster, the "We want you to join the U.S. Army" with his finger pointing. They're pretty much like cartoons or posters, usually with words on them. I think the reason this art was so influential back then is because they didn't have technology in their pocket like we have today. So flashy posters and newspaper ads is where they would get their information. The art just made it appealing. The Uncle Sam poster was famously made to convince young men to join the military. Most countries back then were using art to propagandize their citizens. I will leave some art examples if you want to see some for yourself on my website, www.marcospodcast.com. Another famous example was Rosie the Riveteer. She was a woman showing her arm with a red headband. She was essentially a character to encourage women to join the workforce because back then women, they mostly stayed at home and took care of the family while men worked. Since the men were being drafted into the war or joining the military, they had a large shortage of workers. Propaganda art was not always used to rally citizens, it was also used to demonize the enemy. On the other side, Germany used a lot of portraits of Hitler, showing them his image and his influence. Famously, there's one called Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, which means one people, one empire, one leader. It was an incredibly effective message to the German people. Germany and Japan's art had more of like a darkness to it and were not as cartoonish like the American ones. In the aftermath of the war, a lot of artists they got highly criticized and ridiculed by their art, but it remains a huge reminder of the atrocities and the dark times our world was under. Well, that's all we have time for today, and I appreciate you all tuning in and listening. And I highly encourage you to check out some of our previous podcasts where we start to talk about the Second World War and the beginning of it. If you like this episode today, please consider following us on all social media, and I will leave the links in the description. Thank you, and we will see you next time.